Have you ever wondered why reading a text message, like literally just a string of pixels on a glowing glass screen, can actually make your physical heart start pounding in your chest?
Oh, yeah. It's a very real physical reaction to something totally abstract.
Right. Or, why a shift in some random cultural trend can completely change what you desire on a deeply personal, emotional level. Usually, when we try to understand human nature, we look at it in these totally isolated
Yeah,
pieces.
completely siloed.
Exactly. Like if you want to understand the pounding heart, you read a neurology book. If you want to understand the desire, you look at psychology. And for the cultural trend, you go study sociology. It's just incredibly fragmented.
It is, and I mean, that fragmentation creates a massive blind spot for us. We end up with all these different disciplines and, entirely different vocabularies for describing what is basically a single integrated system,
Hmm.
which is you. You aren't a collection of isolated departments. You're one continuous feedback loop.
And that is exactly what we are unpacking today. We've got our hands on this master blueprint. It's this collection of mind maps, chat logs, and these really cool stacked visual frameworks that detail something called the human systems stack.
Or sometimes referred to as the layers of human function.
Right. And the mission of today's deep dive is to really explore this architecture. Because this isn't just some dry anatomy lesson.
Yeah.
It's a mental shortcut. It's a way to understand exactly how your physical meat suit, your logical brain, your messy emotions, and the society you live in all plug directly into each other.
Yeah, it really connects the dots.
So, okay, let's unpack this because visually the sources give us a few different really compelling ways to picture this whole stack.
They do.
Mhm.
And grounding this in a visual metaphor is incredibly helpful before we start tearing into the specific layers. So to understand the stack, you can picture it in three distinct ways from the source material. The first is an 8-layer horizontal structure. So picture a skyscraper being constructed, starting from a very dark, dense foundational basement and stacking upward layer by layer until you reach the penthouse.
Kind of like a layered cake, but, for human existence.
Yeah, exactly. Or like a really complex tech stack. The second visual is a mind map tree. So imagine a central core that radiates outward, branching into more and more complex networks, and it uses specific color coding to group different types of human functions together.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. And the third, and honestly perhaps the most profound way to picture it, is an onion model. Think of concentric nested circles. In an onion, every outer layer depends entirely on the structural integrity of the inner layers to even exist.
I really love that onion metaphor. So if we are building the system from the ground up, or I guess from the absolute center of the onion outward, we have to start at the bottom, the absolute bedrock, because the sources note that each layer builds on the one below it. So without this baseline, nothing else in the system gets powered on.
Right, the whole thing would collapse.
Exactly. We are talking about the biological foundation, starting with the autonomic layer.
Yeah, so the autonomic layer is, quite simply, your automatic life support. Visually, in these blueprints, this layer is given a dark foundational tone, so deep blues and greens, and it's marked with really simple icons like a heartbeat or a pair of lungs.
Makes sense.
This is the innermost circle of your existence. It handles the entirely involuntary processes, so your heart rate, your respiratory rhythm, digestion, temperature regulation, blood pressure. It is doing all the heavy lifting of keeping yourselves alive without requiring a single ounce of conscious effort from you.
Right. It's like the ultimate background app running on your phone. You never actually open it. You never really think about it. But if it crashes, the whole phone dies immediately.
That's a perfect way to put it.
And sitting just above that or wrapped immediately around it in our onion model is the hemispheric layer. This is the physical dual processor of the brain. You have the left hemisphere, which handles language, logic, and sequential analysis.
The highly detailed stuff.
Exactly. And then you have the right hemisphere, which is managing spatial awareness, emotion, creativity, and broad pattern recognition. But what really caught my eye in the blueprints is that these aren't two isolated computers in a room. There's a very specific mechanism bridging them called the corpus callosum.
Yes, that physical bridge is a critical piece of the architecture. The corpus callosum is this thick band of nerve fibers that allows the highly detailed, logical left hemisphere to constantly talk to the holistic, creative right hemisphere.
So they're constantly trading notes.
Exactly. It synthesizes those two distinct processing streams into one coherent feed. If you didn't have that bridge, you might be able to read the words in a sentence using your left brain, but you'd completely miss the sarcastic tone of voice, which your right brain processes. The bridge is what makes you whole.
So if I'm looking at this entirely through the lens of computer architecture, which is, to be fair, totally my default setting, the autonomic layer is the raw power supply and the cooling fans, right? It just
See.
keeps the machine from melting down. And then the hemispheric layer is the physical dual core processor sorting all the raw data inputs. But, and here is the massive gap I'm trying to wrap my head around. How do these raw biological processors actually cross the chasm into generating thoughts?
Ah.
Because we have blood pressure on one side and spatial awareness on the other. But how does meat and electricity become, a subjective person?
Well, what's fascinating here is that these basic physical layers are exactly what allow the mind-level layers to finally emerge. In the framework, as we cross this chasm, the visual color coding shifts from those dark foundational blues into vibrant purples.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the hardware of the autonomic and hemispheric systems provides the necessary processing power and stability for the next massive evolutionary leap in the stack. I mean, you simply cannot run complex software without stable hardware. The raw data sorting of the hemispheres is the absolute prerequisite for the birth of subjective experience.
Okay, so we leave the physical meat of the brain and boot up the software of the human mind, the spark of self. And the very first layer of that software, which I guess is the third layer overall in the stack, is consciousness.
Yes, consciousness. It's defined here in the sources as awareness, self-reflection, and subjective experience. But there is a really brilliant mechanism described in the framework. Consciousness acts as the decision gate, where deliberate choice first appears in the system.
The decision gate, I actually had to stop and just think about that phrase when I read it.
It's a great term.
It really is, because down in the autonomic layer, your heart beats, but you don't choose it. In the hemispheric layer, your ear picks up a loud noise, and your brain processes the raw audio data. But again, you don't choose to hear it.
It just happens.
Exactly. But when that data hits the decision gate of consciousness, this tiny gap opens up. You become subjectively aware of the sound, and in that gap, you can choose whether to ignore it or turn your head to look. Deliberate choice finally enters the universe.
It really is the moment the system wakes up and becomes aware of itself. And once you have that conscious awareness, that ability to pause at the decision gate, you can start actively using tools.
Which brings us to the next layer.
Right. Building directly on top of conscious awareness is the cognitive layer. This is your mental toolkit. We're talking about memory, sustained attention, problem solving, planning, and reasoning.
So it's not just reacting anymore.
Exactly. This isn't just passive awareness, it's the machinery of active, deliberate thinking. You are consciously pulling up a memory, holding it in your attention, and reasoning out a future plan.
Wait, I'm stuck here for a second. Because the framework lists the next layer, layer 5, as the intelligence layer. But if I already have problem solving, reasoning, and planning in my cognitive toolkit, why do I need a totally separate layer for intelligence? Aren't planning and intelligence essentially the exact same thing?
Ah, I love this question. That's the exact friction point that makes this framework so useful. It separates having the tools from knowing how to effectively update the way you use those tools based on the environment.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
Sure. The intelligence layer is explicitly defined as adaptability, abstraction, pattern detection, and crucially, learning from feedback. It's the capacity to learn, generalize, and adapt in completely new situations. The intelligence layer was actually explicitly added during a planning conversation in the chat logs because of this exact distinction.
Oh, wow. Well, here's where it gets really interesting, though. If cognition is the toolkit, like your memory, your ability to plan and intelligence is learning from feedback and adapting, it means you could theoretically have a highly functioning cognitive layer, but a completely broken intelligence layer, right?
Absolutely.
Like, I'm picturing someone who is incredibly articulate, has a photographic memory, can build a detailed 10-step plan. But when step 2 fails, they just stubbornly keep doing step 2 over and over again. Are they cognitively capable but systemically lacking intelligence?
Yes, and that beautifully illustrates the difference between the two layers. Memory, which lives in the cognitive layer, isn't enough on its own without the adaptability of the intelligence layer.
Because they just keep repeating the mistake.
Right. You can remember every single time you failed at a specific task. That is high cognitive function. But if you lack the intelligence layer's ability to actually integrate that feedback and change your behavior, you will just blindly repeat the failed plan. Intelligence is what allows the system to step back, look at the cognitive tools, and say, hey, we need to update our software.
So cognition is having the map and knowing how to read it. Intelligence is realizing the road is physically closed, throwing the map in the back seat, and figuring out a detour on the fly.
That's a great analogy.
But let's say I'm that stubborn person. I'm following my GPS instructions right into a lake because my cognitive map said turn left, and my intelligence layer just refused to adapt to the fact that there's a massive body of water in front of me.
Well, hopefully before you hit the water, another layer kicks in to save you.
Right. But here is the fatal flaw of pure intelligence. Even if you have the map, and even if you have the brilliant adaptability to calculate a million different detours, you still have to actually want to drive somewhere.
Ah, yes.
Motivation.
Exactly. A perfectly intelligent supercomputer will sit in a driveway forever because it doesn't care where it goes. It needs a destination. It needs desire.
Right.
Which brings us to the next level in the stack, the internal compass, the emotional layer.
Right. We have awareness, we have a cognitive toolkit, we have adaptable intelligence. But you're right, what actually drives this beautifully complex, cold calculating system into action? The emotional layer acts as that compass.
And what's included there?
It includes fear, joy, anger, attachment, motivation, and regulation. The sources explicitly note that these are the feelings and affective states guiding priorities and behavior.
I love extending that GPS metaphor here. Your logical cognitive brain can map out 10 different possible routes you could take in your life. It can calculate the time, the efficiency, the fuel required, and that is pure logic. But emotion is the underlying weighting algorithm that tells the system which destination actually matters.
Without emotion, all choices are equally logical and equally meaningless. Exactly. Staying in bed and starving to death is just as logical as getting up and going to work, unless you actually feel a desire to live or a fear of failure. But because the sources say it interacts so heavily with decision-making, I'm wondering, does this emotional layer sit on top of intelligence to filter our logic, or does it run parallel to it?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it completely dismantles that old myth that logic and emotion are enemies. They aren't separate. They're intertwined. The emotional layer sits intimately close to cognition and intelligence. It provides the necessary motivation and regulation to prioritize our cognitive problem solving.
How does that actually work in real time, though? Like, how does an emotion physically regulate my cognitive toolkit?
Think about the mechanisms of different emotions. Let's take fear. When the emotional layer processes intense fear, it immediately hijacks the cognitive layer, narrowing your attention.
Oh, like tunnel vision.
Exactly. It creates tunnel vision. So your problem-solving skills focus entirely on immediate survival. It deprioritizes long-term planning because, well, long-term planning is useless if you don't survive the next 5 minutes.
That makes total sense.
But on the flip side, joy or safety acts as a signal that broadens your cognitive attention. It allows the intelligence layer to play, to experiment, to find abstract patterns and be creative, simply because the system isn't under threat. The emotion is the fuel that dictates the scope and direction of the cognition.
Okay, wow. Emotion points the ship, cognition rows the oars. So at this point in the stack, our internal individual is fully constructed. We started with the dark, watery foundation of a basic heartbeat in the autonomic system. We moved up into the dual processors of the hemispheres. We crossed the chasm into the purple mind layers of consciousness, cognition, and intelligence.
Right.
And then we added the internal compass of the emotional layer to give it drive. So we have a complete, fully functioning, intelligent human being. But humans don't exist in a vacuum. We step out our front door.
And we immediately bump into other human beings. That is where the stack has to move from internal biological and mental systems out into the external world.
The environment.
Yeah. We transition away from the purple mind layers and enter the orange-coated realms of the framework, starting with the social layer.
This is the outward expansion. The social layer contains communication, empathy, roles, group dynamics, norms, and relationships. It is the architecture of our interactions. And going back to what you said earlier about the corpus callosum bridging the two hemispheres of the brain, it feels like empathy is basically the corpus callosum for society.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, it's the mechanism that allows two completely separate brains to bridge the gap and synchronize with each other.
That is a brilliant way to map the micro onto the macro. Empathy allows for that shared processing. But the social layer alone is really just the mechanics of interaction. Building directly upon that is the absolute top of the stack, the cultural layer.
The final layer.
Right. If we go back to our onion metaphor, this is the outermost ring, the skin of the onion, color-coded orange. It contains values, beliefs, shared stories, institutions, symbols, and what the framework calls default scripts.
Default scripts. Man, that is such a powerful, almost slightly terrifying term.
It really is. It's the invisible code you run without even realizing you're running it.
Exactly. It's the script you follow because everyone else around you is running it too. If the emotional layer is the GPS weighting algorithm telling you where you want to go, culture is the actual road network and the traffic laws.
It's the environment.
It's the external shared reality that dictates which routes are legally or socially accessible for your internal GPS to even choose from. Social is just the act of two cars passing each other. Culture is the shared agreement that we all drive on the right side of the road.
And, the framework actually provides some really practical advice on how to visualize all of this complex, interconnected data.
Oh, the mind map best practices.
Yeah. If you're sketching this out as a mind map, it suggests using one keyword per node to improve clarity and recall, rather than writing out long, messy sentences. And it emphasizes using simple, universal icons to make scanning easier.
Like what kind of icons?
Like a brain for the cognitive layers, a heart for the emotional layer, a group of people for the social layer, and a globe for the cultural layer.
A globe for culture. It really hits home the sheer scale of that outer layer. So what does this all mean? When we look at this whole structure, especially that nested onion visual where the outer layers depend on the inner ones, I can't help but see a potential reverse effect here.
What do you mean?
Well, we spent this whole time talking about how the stack builds upward or outward. The autonomic meat supports the hemispheric processor, which boots up consciousness, which builds up to culture. It's a bottom-up build.
Yeah.
But don't these top-level default scripts in the cultural layer actually reach down and dictate how we regulate our inner emotions? Doesn't the stack flow top-down too?
This raises an important question, and it really highlights the dynamic, living nature of this architecture. I mean, we actually saw this confirmed in the source conversations. The framework isn't just a one-way street where biology blindly dictates culture.
Right.
The cultural layer shapes meaning. By establishing that shared meaning and creating a broader context, the cultural layer acts as a pervasive environment that the lower layers are literally forced to adapt to. Your cultural default scripts will absolutely dictate what your emotional layer regulates.
So like in one culture, the default script might say, anger is dangerous, suppress it. And in another, the script says, anger is power, express it. The culture actively rewires the emotional compass.
Precisely. The cultural layer is the atmosphere that the rest of the stack breathes. It permeates all the way down.
Wow. It is just a brilliantly holistic way to map the human experience. I mean, we have journeyed all the way from the dark foundational band of the autonomic system up through the purple mind layers of consciousness, cognition, and adaptable intelligence.
It's a lot of ground to cover.
It is. We explored the internal compass of our emotions, and we radiated all the way out to the orange-hued, globe-spanning realms of society and culture. And having this 8-layer blueprint provides such a powerful, practical diagnostic lens for you, the listener.
It really does.
The next time you face a massive friction point in your life, you don't just have to sit there feeling overwhelmed by a generalized sense of anxiety. You can use this stack to pinpoint exactly where the malfunction lives. Is your heart racing because of an autonomic nervous system spike? Are you failing to adapt because of a stubborn intelligence layer? Or are you just bumping up against an invisible cultural default script that no longer serves you?
Gives you the specific vocabulary to untangle your own life. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to mull over.
Oh, lay it on me.
Let's return to that concentric nested onion model one last time. If the outermost layer of your existence is culture, and the innermost foundational core is your autonomic nervous system, what happens when a sudden cultural shock ripples inward? Think about the stock market. A red downward trending line on a screen is purely a cultural symbol. It has no physical mass. But if you see that cultural symbol crash, the panic penetrates through the social layer, it bypasses your logical cognition, hijacks your emotional fear center, and literally alters your innermost autonomic layer.
Oh my gosh.
A shared cultural story about invisible money can literally cause your physical heart rate to spike and your blood pressure to surge. It proves, without a doubt, that the outside world and your innermost biology are separated by nothing more than a few layers of incredibly porous programming.
Wow. A cultural symbol physically changing your resting heart rate. That is definitely something to think about the next time you check your phone. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the human system stack. We'll catch you on the next one.